Killing Joke is an English post-punk band formed in October 1978 in Notting Hill, London, England. Other sources report the band formed in early 1979. Founding members Jaz Coleman and Geordie Walker have been the only constant members. A key influence on industrial rock, their early music was described by critics Stephen Thomas Erlewine and John Dougan as quasi-metal. Dancing to a tune of doom and gloom, which gradually evolved over the years, incorporating elements of electronic music, synthpop, gothic rock, and alternative rock, though always emphasizing Coleman's savagely strident vocals. Finding modest commercial success, Killing Joke have influenced many later bands and artists, such as Nirvana, Ministry, Nine Inch Nails, and Soundgarden. History, formation and first three albums. Big Paul Ferguson was drummer in the band of Matt Tyre Clifford when he met Jeremy Jaz Coleman in Notting Hill, London. In October 1978, after Coleman was briefly keyboard player in that band, he and Ferguson left to form Killing Joke. They placed an advertisement in the music press which attracted guitarist Kevin Geordie Walker and bassist Martin Youth Glover. According to Coleman, their manifesto was to define the exquisite beauty of the atomic age in terms of style, sound and form. The band played a debut gig on August 4, 1979 at Cheltenham Wheatcombe Lodge supporting the Ruts and the Selector. By September 1979, shortly before the release of their debut EP, Turn to Red, they began the Malicious Damage record label with graphic artist Mike Coles as a way to press and sell their music. Island Records distributed the records, until Malicious Damage switched to For Example Records in 1980. The songs on Killing Joke's early singles were primitive punk rock sometimes mixed with electronic. Turn to Red came to the attention of legendary DJ John Peel, who was keen to champion the band's urgent new sound and gave them extensive airplay. They quickly progressed this sound into something denser, more aggressive, and more akin to heavy metal, as heard on their first two albums, Killing Joke and the more abrasive What's This For? They toured extensively throughout the UK during this time, and both fans of post-punk and heavy metal took interest in Killing Joke through singles such as Follow the Leaders. Killing Joke became notorious largely due to the controversies that arose from their imagery. Typically the images that appeared on their records and on stage while performing live were bizarre and potentially shocking and inflammatory. One promotion poster featured an original photo, erroneously believed to be of Pope Pius XI. The picture was of German Abbot Alban Skarchlitter walking among rows of Nazi soldiers offering Hitler salutes and appearing to return the salute, and was later used for the cover of the band's compilation album Laugh. I Nearly Bought One. Shortly afterwards, the band was banned from performing a concert in Glasgow, Scotland. The Candlelight Records bio of the band say that far from being industry darlings they had run-ins with various music journalists at the time. Killing Joke's third album, Revelations, produced by Connie Plank, was released in 1982, and supported by a pair of performances on BBC Radio's The John Peel Show and by the singles Chop Chop, Empire Song, and an unofficial release of We Have Joy. The LP reached No. 12 in the UK top albums. By 1982, members of Killing Joke, especially Coleman, had become immersed in the occult, particularly the works of occultist Aleister Crowley. In February of that year, Coleman, with Geordie and Youth following shortly after, moved in Iceland to survive the apocalypse, which Coleman predicted was coming soon. While in Iceland, Coleman and Geordie worked with musicians from the band Ear in the project in Iceland. After a few months, Youth decided there was no indication of the apocalypse, and decided to move back to England. Youth then began the band Brilliant with Paul Ferguson, but the latter defected and travelled to Iceland to rejoin Killing Joke with new bassist Paul Raven in tow. After spending some time in Iceland, Killing Joke returned to England and began touring and recording again. The new lineup soon produced, again with Connie Plank, the single Birds of a Feather / Sun Goes Down / Flock the B-side, and Ha! A 6-track 10 inches EP of a live performance recorded live at Larry's Hideaway in Toronto in August. Shift towards a commercial sound, Killing Joke's fourth album, Fire Dances, contained music that, like that heard on the Birds of a Feather single, was artier and relatively calmer than before, which began a new direction. This was continued with the non-LP singles Me or You, and A New Day, the latter promoted with a music video. Mixing their sound with a slightly pop style, and with Coleman singing and not growling, Killing Joke had developed a variation of new wave on their fifth album, Nighttime. They achieved mainstream success with the single Love Like Blood, which covered all ground from goth to dance. It peaked at number 16 in the UK and number 8 in the Netherlands. Nighttime also included the singles 80s, and Kings and Queens, which both reached the UK Top 75. The album itself reached number 11 in the UK. The music on Killing Joke's sixth album, Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, was mostly similar in sound and mood to Love Like Blood. While no less aggressive and heavy than their older work, Brighter Than a Thousand Suns diverged musically in ways that led to controversy among listeners. In this case, disagreements between fans and critics alike included opinions on whether the band was conforming with pressures from EG Records to develop a more commercial sound, to whether the songs were relevant for those listeners more comfortable with their proto-post-punk beginnings. The record was a commercial failure compared to the previous effort. It didn't go in the top 50 in the UK charts. However, 2 singles were released from the album Adorations, and Sanity, and the band continued touring successfully until the end of the year. In 1987, Coleman began plans for a solo record of unusual music, and he made demos of his songs, on which he performed with Geordie's assistance. The project ran way over budget, and so, despite Coleman's objections, the record company decided that the music would be released under the name Killing Joke in order to best recoup the costs. Attempts were made to include Killing Joke rhythm section members Raven and Ferguson, but it didn't work out, and tensions ultimately led to both being dismissed from the band. Session player Jimmy Copley was then brought in to provide the drumming on the songs, along with percussion player Jeff Scantlebury. The resulting album, Outside the Gate, is Killing Joke's most controversial album, due to its synth-led sonics and disagreement over the quality of the material. Sounds said of the album, "It's a stodgy, inconclusive LP that fails in all but the most basic of senses to achieve its end, leaving us feeling soured and unimpressed." NME shared the same point of view and depicted it as a private breakfast of ideas, depicting poor old Jazz wading through quicksand with his jeans rolled down yet again. Worse. He seems to be wandering off in exactly the same direction. Outside the Gate is not signature sound Killing Joke, being built around Coleman's orchestral keyboards instead of Geordie's distinctive guitar riffs, which were all but drowned out in the final mix. 2 singles, America, and My Love of This Land, were released from the album but did little to improve its fortunes, although the B-sides were live versions of old material. The video for the former features Coleman and Geordie with drummer Jimmy Copley and session bassist Jerome Rimpson, who never actually recorded with the band. On September 19, 1987, Coleman had delivered a lecture at London's Courtauld Institute outlining the thinking behind the then unreleased Outside the Gate album, touching on numerology and the occult. Geordie and percussionist Jeff Scantlebury provided a minimal musical backing at the event. A recording of the lecture was eventually released under the title The Courtauld Talks on Martin Atkins Invisible Records in 1989. Revised lineup and extremities, Dirt and Various Repressed Emotions. Towards the end of 1988, Coleman and Geordie decided to get Killing Joke up and running again as a live band, and they began looking for full-time bass players and drummers. First on board was drummer Martin Atkins, who had gained notability in Public Image Limited and later Ministry and Pigface. A suitable bass player proved more difficult. Former Smiths man Andy Rourke was hired, then dismissed after only 3 days. Eventually the band settled on Welsh bass player Dave Tafe Ball, and played their first gigs in almost 2 years in December 1988. These featured the best of their 1980 to 1985 work, alongside powerful new material which alluded to the band's earlier, harsher sound. Nothing from Brighter Than a Thousand Suns or Outside the Gate was played. Touring continued across the UK, Europe and the US until August 1989, when the band took a break to record its new material in Germany, and to allow Jaz Coleman time to record songs from the victorious city with Anne Dudley of Art of Noise, which was released the following year. For reasons which remain unclear, The German Killing Joke sessions were shelved and bass player Tafe left the band to be replaced by old hand Paul Raven. The revised lineup began recording again, this time in London, and the result was Killing Joke's 8th album, The Ferocious Extremities, Dirt and Various Repressed Emotions, released on the German Noise International label in 1990. It included some of the heaviest, noisiest and harshest music ever to appear on a Killing Joke record, although the progressive musical spirit of the previous two albums remained as well. Songs included Solitude, Slipstream, Age of Greed, and the single Money Is Not Our God. Once again, the band toured Europe and North America, but by the middle of 1991 this promising new lineup had imploded. Coleman emigrated to New Zealand to live on a remote Pacific island. Geordie Walker, Martin Atkins, Paul Ferguson, Paul Raven and the band's live keyboard player John Bechtel added Scottish vocalist Chris Connolly and continued as the short-lived Murder, Incorporated, releasing a self-titled album in 1992. Reunion with Youth and Butterfly Era. A Killing Joke anthology, Laugh? I Nearly Bought One, was released in 1992, and during its production, Geordie was reacquainted with Youth, who suggested that they reform the band with himself back on bass. That same year, two singles appeared featuring the early songs Change and War Dance in several new versions remixed by Youth, by then a very successful producer. Coleman had produced the 1993 debut album Churn by the New Zealand band Shahad, and Shahad drummer Tom Larkin played drums on some of the songs on Pandemonium. Relations later soured between Coleman and Shahad due to a dispute over Coleman's production fee for Churn, and the fact that Shahad considered him a megalomaniac. Shahad's second album, 1995's Killjoy, includes a song about Coleman in the dispute, Silver Cup. Coleman has also made a number of disparaging remarks about Shahad in the media. Shahad singer and guitarist John Dougan says his band have since put the dispute behind them. Killing Joke also sued Nirvana during this phase, alleging that the riff for the latter's song Come As You Are was copied from the riff for their song 80s. The lawsuit was dropped after the suicide of Nirvana frontman Kurt Cobain. The reactivated Killing Joke released two strong and well-received albums on Youth's Butterfly Recordings label, Pandemonium and Democracy, which saw the band shift back to the simpler arrangements of their early albums whilst also employ young talent, the likes of Waxworth Industries, in order to provide an alternative and road to the band's new and evolving sound. Pandemonium wove a metal ritualistic sound with mosh beats and loops and provided Killing Joke with a memorable Top of the Pops performance for the single Millennium, which was a UK Top 40 hit. The title track was also released as a single and made the UK Top 30. Democracy successfully introduced acoustic guitar into the mix, as well as adopting more of a live band sound again. The title track was again released as a single and made the UK Top 40. Much of Pandemonium and all of Democracy featured session drummer Jeff Dougan. He also played live with the band throughout this era. Nick Hollowell Walker joined the band on keyboards and programming for 11 years from 1994 to 2005, notably on Democracy and XXV Gathering. Youth bowed out of live performance early in the Democracy tour and was replaced by Troy Gregory, ex-Prong. After the Democracy tour, the band went on an extended hiatus. Jaz Coleman and Youth produced a string of well-received orchestral rock albums based on the music of legends such as Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd and The Doors. Coleman became composer-in-residence for New Zealand and Czech symphony orchestras. He seems to have become something of a celebrity in the Czech Republic and made his acting debut with a main role in the film Rock A Bla by Czech filmmaker Petr Zelenka. Reformation, next two albums and death of Paul Raven, Coleman, Geordie and Youth reformed Killing Joke in 2002, and recorded their second self-titled album. Produced by Andy Gill and released to much acclaim in 2003 on the Zuma Sony label, it was heralded as a powerful addition to Extremities and other visceral 1990s albums, and considered one of their finest recordings. In 2003 the band played at the biggest open-air festival in Europe, Sustained Woodstock in Poland. The War on Terror and the invasion of Iraq were cited as major factors in their reforming, and this is reflected in the lyrical content of much of the album, based on themes of war, government control and Armageddon. The album, which fell just short of the UK Top 40, was their heaviest to date and spawned two singles, Loose Cannon, and Seeing Red. The songs are all credited to Coleman Glover Gill, although Raven's name is also on the list of musicians on the liner notes, marking his return to the band after more than a decade. The album was accompanied by a tour of the United States, Europe and Australia in 2003/2004, with ex-Prong drummer Ted Parsons on board. In February 2005, now with young twin Zero and Sack Trick drummer Ben Calvert, Killing Joke played 2 consecutive shows at London's Shepherd's Bush Empire to commemorate their 25th anniversary. DVD and CD recordings from these concerts were released on Cooking Vinyl in the fall of 2005 as XXV Gathering, the band that prays together stays together. In June 2005, remastered and expanded editions of their 2 1990s Butterfly Recordings albums, Pandemonium and Democracy, were released by Cooking Vinyl. These were followed in July by their first 4 albums on EMI, who by then owned the For Example Records catalogue. The second batch of EMI remasters would not appear until January 2008. In mid-2005, frontman from industrial band, Inertia, Reza Uddin, joins the band on keyboards, and they supported the British leg of Ma Paragraphed Lee Kra 1/4 E's World Tour and then began work on their next album in Prague. It was at this time the contribution to the world of rock was recognized when they were awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award at the 2005 Kerrang Awards. Opting for simplicity and raw energy, the band recorded the new album in Hell, the basement rehearsal space of Studio Faust Records in Prague, going for live takes with the minimum of overdues. The result was Hosannas from the Basements of Hell, released in April 2006 on Cooking Vinyl, which made the UK Top 75. Killing Joke began a European tour in support of the album in April 2006. Bass player Paul Raven abruptly departed after a few dates to tour with Ministry and was temporarily replaced by Neil Brown. The tour included an appearance headlining the MySpace stage of the Download Festival on June 10, 2006, which received 4Ks from Kerrang! Magazine. Other highlights of the summer included a memorable set in Japan at the Fuji Rock Festival where they were joined on stage by Orb frontman Alex Patterson and headlining the Beautiful Days Festival in the UK. The band's momentum suffered another blow, when health problems caused the autumn leg of the tour to be cancelled. In October 2006, it was announced that Coleman had been chosen as composer-in-residence for the European Union. As composer-in-residence he will be commissioned to write music for special occasions. Early in 2007, Killing Joke released 3 archival collections via Candlelight Records. The first, Inside Extremities, is a double CD of material taken from the band's preparations for the Extremities album, rehearsals, rare mixes, a previously unheard track, The Fanatic, and a full live show from the Extremities tour. This was followed by bootleg vinyl archive volumes 1 and 2, each of which is a 3-CD box set of live and concert bootleg recordings originally released on vinyl in the 1980s, plus the Astoria gig from the Pandemonium tour, which was voted one of the greatest gigs of all time by Kerrang! In October 2007, the 1990 album Extremities, Dirt and Various Repressed Emotions, which had long been out of print, was reissued in remastered form on Candlelight Records. On October 20, Paul Raven died of heart failure prior to a recording session in Geneva, Switzerland. In his honor, Coleman composed a lament for a 21st-century Englishman. On January 28, 2008 the albums Fire Dances, Nighttime, Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, and Outside the Gate were finally reissued in remastered form with bonus tracks by EMI. Each of these carries the message dedicated to our brother Paul Vincent Raven 1961 2007. Reunion of original lineup. After the death of Paul Raven, the original lineup of Jazz, Youth, Geordie and Paul Ferguson announced they were to reunite. Coleman told Terrorizer magazine that everything came together when we all met at Raven's funeral. It was funny the unifying effect it had on all of us. It made us realize our mortality and how important Killing Joke is to all of us. The original lineup of Killing Joke assembled in Granada, Spain, to prepare a world tour consisting of 2 nights in various capital cities of the world, playing a program of 4 complete albums. The rehearsals will be immortalized on Duende, the Spanish sessions, released in 2008 on World Recordings. The first nights were dedicated to their first 2 albums, Killing Joke and What's This For?, while the second night featured large parts of Pandemonium plus some early singles released on Island Records. The world tour began on September 11 in Tokyo and concluded in Chicago on October 14. Killing Joke released an album of radio session recordings, The Peel Sessions 1979–1981, on September 8, 2008. This is the second time all 17 tracks were released in their live session form. According to Discogs.com, the tracks on this disc were originally unofficially released as a CD by Pontiac Records, titled Unspeakable. The band continued its reformation by playing the All Tomorrow's Parties Festival in May 2009. They performed at the Sonosphere Festival in Knebworth, UK on August 2 and headlined the Rebellion Festival in Blackpool. Killing Joke performed in the Big Top 10 at the 2009 Isle of Wight Festival after being hand-picked by Tim Burgess, frontman for the Charlatans. During October and November 2009, Killing Joke recorded their new CD with the original lineup. All members of Killing Joke have commented that this is the single most important work that Killing Joke have ever done. The new album was released on September 27, 2010 in the United Kingdom and Japan, and on October 1 in Europe on Spine Farm Records under the title Absolute Descent, marking the 30th anniversary for Killing Joke. It was preceded by the In Excelsis EP released on June 23, 2010, and followed by a tour in the UK, Europe and North America for promoting the album. In November, the band was honored with the Trophy for Innovator at the Classic Rock Roll of Honor 2010, marking their unique evolution of sound over the last 30-plus years, which has incorporated electronic, synth and alternative rock and influenced a generation of rock acts including Nirvana, Nine Inch Nails, Faith No More and Tool. They were awarded the honor at the Roundhouse in London by longtime fan of the band Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. On November 26, 2010, Killing Joke released a special edition Record Store Day Black Friday 2 CD set called Absolute Descent for independent record stores. The band embarked on a European and UK tour culminating in a performance at the Hammersmith Apollo London. This was followed by a performance at London's Royal Festival Hall in the new year, and this was recorded for an upcoming live album and a headline slot at the UK's largest urban festival, the Camden Crawl. The band were also honoured at the Metal Hammer Annual Awards, receiving the Album of the Year award. Summer festivals followed, including a performance at Sonosphere Knebworth with the band retiring to Spain to record a new album for 2012. On April 2, 2012, Killing Joke released a new album titled MMXII on Spine Farm Records/Universal. It reached no. A44 upon its first week of release, the band's highest UK chart placing since their eponymous album of 2003, as well as charting across Europe. The band embarked on their largest UK and European tour in 20 years and a full European tour, and the record met with critical acclaim across the board. Influence: in 1982, G.C. Green and Paul Neville first came together as Faller Because, named after the first track on What's This For?, and were later joined by Justin Bruadrick, setting the foundations of Godflesh, who covered Requiem Live, with Raven on bass. In 1987, Metallica covered Killing Joke's The Wait for their EP Garage Days Revisited. James Hetfield picked Jazz as one of his top 20 favorite singers for a poll in Rolling Stone. In 1993, Helmet covered Killing Joke's Primitive on their singles and B-sides compilation Born Annoying, released by Amphetamine Reptile Records. In some early interviews, the members of Soundgarden cited Killing Joke as one of the bands they listened to most. In 1995, Icehouse covered Love Like Blood on their album The Berlin Tapes. Films: Killing Joke are the subject of a feature-length documentary film The Death and Resurrection Show scheduled for release in 2013. 2 preview trailers have been released combining archive footage of Killing Joke over the last 31 years with new and unseen footage of recent live tours, recording sessions including The Great Pyramid, and interview subjects including Jaz Coleman, Geordie, Youth, Jimmy Page, Peter Hook, Chris Kimsey, Mike Coles, Dave Grohl, Alex Patterson and Lawrence Gardner discussing Killing Joke, UFOs, mysticism, religion and the end of the world. The film is produced by New Zealand's ILC Productions, UK Indie Coffee Films and Jaz Coleman, with filmmaker, photographer and lifelong gatherer Sean Pettigrew directing. Side projects: Niceland, Brilliant, Pigface, Murder, Incorporated. The Damage Manual, Transmission, The Fireman, Inertia. Members, current members: Jaz Coleman Euro-led vocals, keyboards, Kevin Geordie Walker Euro guitars, Martin Youth Glover Euro bass guitar, Paul Ferguson Euro drums, Reza Woodin Euro keyboards. Former members: Paul Raven Euro bass guitar, Martin Atkins Euro drums, Dave Tafeball Euro bass guitar, Ben Culvert Euro drums. Additional musicians: Dave Kovacevic Euro keyboards, Jimmy Copley Euro drums, John Bechtel Euro keyboards. Programming: Nick Hollowell Walker Euro keyboards. Programming: Jeff Dugmore Euro drums, Troy Gregory Euro bass guitar, Dave Grohl Euro drums, Ted Parsons Euro drums. Timeline. Discography. Studio albums: Killing Joke, What's This For? Revelations, Fire Dances, Nighttime, Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, Outside the Gate, The Courtal Talks, Extremities, Dirt and Various Repressed Emotions, Pandemonium, Democracy, Killing Joke, Hosannas from the Basements of Hell, Absolute Descent, MMXII, Killing Joke Euro Wikipedia book, references. External links.